Over 2,000 years ago, in the bustling cities of ancient Greece, there lived a man named Epictetus. Born into slavery, his beginnings were humble and challenging. Yet, despite the hardships of his early life, he rose to become one of the greatest philosophers the world has ever known. Epictetus didn't write grand books or lead vast armies. Instead, he taught a simple yet profound idea, that true happiness and freedom come from understanding one thing, the difference between what we can control and what we cannot. Today, his teachings still echo across time, offering guidance in our chaotic, modern lives. Join me as we explore what Epictetus said about happiness and how his wisdom can help us find peace in any storm. Epictetus once said, "Happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle: some things are within our control, and some things are not." At first glance, it seems so simple. But think about it for a moment. How often do we tie our happiness to things we can't control? The weather, the actions of others, or the unexpected twists of life? Epictetus believed that our struggles don't come from the events themselves, but from how we react to them. When we focus on what we can control, our thoughts, our actions, our mindset, we unlock the true path to happiness. To understand this better, let's step back in time to ancient Greece. Imagine a young merchant named Lysander, eager to build his fortune. But as fate would have it, life had other plans. Here's his story. Lysander sat alone, the weight of his failures pressing heavily upon his shoulders. His dreams, once vivid and full of promise, now lay in tatters before him. The world seemed cold, indifferent to his struggles. He had tried, he had fought with every ounce of his being, but now, the flames of hope seemed to flicker and die. Despair wrapped its tendrils around his heart, and the horizon ahead appeared shrouded in darkness. In his solitude, Lysander sought answers, something, anything, that could lift him from this chasm of despair. And it was in the midst of this darkness that he heard of a man, a philosopher, whose words had the power to soothe the soul. Enter Epictetus. A former slave turned philosopher, his life had been shaped by suffering and hardship, yet his spirit remained unbroken. Epictetus taught that true freedom lay not in the external world, but in our control over our own thoughts. He believed that the only thing we truly possess is our own mind, and by mastering it, we could endure any hardship. And so, with a heart heavy yet hopeful, Lysander ventured towards this philosopher. He hoped that the words of Epictetus could guide him from the shadows and into the light. His story was about to take a turn, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about strength, suffering, and the human spirit. Lysander stood before Epictetus, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and despair. He had heard tales of the philosopher's wisdom, but now, in his presence, he wasn't sure what to expect. He had come seeking solace, but was it possible to find peace in a world that seemed so unjust? Epictetus, sensing the young man's unrest, spoke softly but firmly. "Lysander, listen to me. There is a truth you must understand, one that has the power to free you from the chains of your own mind." Lysander looked up, his eyes filled with doubt. "What truth?" he asked, his voice heavy with the weight of his suffering. "That you are not a victim of the world. The only things that are truly within your control are your own thoughts, your own reactions. The world may be unpredictable, and life will always throw challenges your way. But how you respond, that is where your power lies." Lysander shook his head, the burden of his failures still pressing down on him. "But what about the things I cannot change? The failures, the loss, the pain?" "Ah, yes. The things you cannot change. These are not your concern. What matters is how you choose to see them. You cannot control the external world, but you can control your perspective. Your mind is like a garden, it can grow weeds of despair or flowers of hope. You must decide which you will nurture." Lysander paused, the weight of those words sinking in. For the first time, he began to see a flicker of light in the darkness. His failures were not the end, merely stepping stones. His control was not over the outcome, but over how he chose to face it. In that moment, Lysander realized that the greatest battle was not against the world, but against his own mind. And as he listened to Epictetus, the seeds of change began to take root within him. The journey to mastery over oneself had just begun. In the pursuit of happiness, there's often a tendency to focus on the external world, on achievements, possessions, or the approval of others. But true happiness, the kind that endures, isn't found in these fleeting things. It lies in something far deeper, something we can control, our own minds. Imagine your life as a series of columns, each representing different aspects, your actions, your relationships, your environment. But there's one column, the first column, that stands above the rest. This column represents your thoughts, your perspective, and your inner dialogue. It is the foundation from which everything else flows. When we focus on the first column, we are choosing to direct our attention toward what we can control, our responses, our attitudes, and the way we see the world. You see, happiness doesn't come from external circumstances, it comes from how we interpret and respond to those circumstances. The first column is where we cultivate peace, where we choose to embrace gratitude, where we decide to let go of what we cannot change. By nurturing this column, by mastering our thoughts and perceptions, we set the stage for lasting happiness. The world may be unpredictable, but within the first column, we can create a sense of stability and contentment, regardless of the chaos around us. So, if you seek happiness, don't look outward. Look inward, and focus on the first column. For it is in this space that true peace resides, the peace that no circumstance can take away. Now, let's explore how this wisdom can shape your journey. As time passed, Lysander began to absorb the teachings of Epictetus, letting them take root in his heart. Slowly, he began to shift his perspective, replacing the weight of despair with the clarity of understanding. The world around him remained chaotic, unpredictable, but within him, a new sense of peace started to bloom. One day, as Lysander walked through a bustling marketplace, he noticed the familiar stirrings of frustration rising within him. A vendor haggled with another, a child cried, the noise and the chaos of the world pressing in. For a moment, he felt that familiar weight of anger and helplessness. But then, a thought echoed in his mind, Epictetus's words. Remember, Lysander, what you can control. It is not the actions of others or the noise around you, but your response that shapes your peace. Lysander stopped in his tracks, taking a deep breath. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the chaos swirl around him, but this time, it didn't touch him. Instead of reacting, he chose to observe. He smiled to himself, realizing that he could either be dragged by the current of the world or stand firm in the stillness of his own mind. From that moment on, Lysander embraced this new way of being. He didn't try to change the world, he simply changed how he viewed it. When challenges arose, he remembered Epictetus's teachings, that true peace comes not from controlling the external world, but from controlling his response to it. He no longer allowed anger or frustration to cloud his mind. Instead, he practiced patience, kindness, and acceptance. In time, Lysander found a profound sense of inner peace. He still faced struggles, still experienced hardship, but he no longer felt at the mercy of them. He understood now that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of one's own mind. Through Epictetus's wisdom, Lysander discovered that peace is not a destination to be reached, it is a way of living, rooted in the choices we make within ourselves every day. And so, Lysander's journey continues, now guided by the calm strength that comes from mastering the mind. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. In the centuries since Epictetus shared his wisdom, the world has changed in countless ways. Technology has advanced, societies have evolved, and yet, the struggles we face as human beings remain strikingly similar. We live in a time filled with distractions, pressures, and uncertainties. But if we look closely, we find that the challenges of today mirror the struggles of the past, struggles Epictetus understood all too well. Take, for example, the overwhelming noise of the modern world. Notifications buzz constantly, demands on our time grow ever more urgent, and we often find ourselves caught in the pursuit of validation, success, or possessions. We can feel trapped, as though the external world controls our peace of mind. But Epictetus's teachings remind us that, in truth, the external world is beyond our control. What we can control is how we respond. You are not disturbed by things, Lysander, but by your opinion of things. This insight, though centuries old, rings as true today as it did in ancient Rome. We face daily challenges, whether it's the pressure to perform at work, the anxiety of social comparison, or the frustration of circumstances beyond our control. Yet, the question remains, how do we respond? In the face of modern struggles, we often turn to external solutions, more possessions, more achievements, more distractions. But Epictetus would ask us to look inward. He would ask us to examine our beliefs, our thoughts, and our reactions. In this busy, fast-paced world, he teaches us that the key to peace is not in acquiring more, but in letting go of what we cannot control and learning to master our own thoughts. Epictetus believed that the road to freedom lies in aligning our desires with reality. In the modern world, this is as relevant as ever. When we stop fighting against the things we cannot change, when we stop letting the opinions of others define our worth, we reclaim our inner peace. Just as Epictetus found peace in his own mind despite the external chaos of his life, so too can we find serenity in the midst of our own struggles. In the end, Epictetus's philosophy teaches us that happiness and peace are not dependent on the world around us, but on the way we engage with it. The world will continue to challenge us, but it is our response, rooted in self-control and perspective, that determines our peace. And so, as we navigate the complexities of the modern world, we are reminded, the greatest struggle is not against the world, but against our own perceptions of it. What can you control in your own life? In our quest for happiness, we often look outward. We chase after the perfect job, the ideal relationship, or the dream home, believing that once we have these things, happiness will follow. But what if the key to happiness isn't found in the circumstances of our lives, but in how we choose to see them? True happiness, Epictetus would say, is not about controlling the external world, but about mastering our own perspective. Life will never unfold exactly as we expect, and we cannot avoid pain, disappointment, or hardship. But what we can control, what we always have control over, is how we interpret and respond to these events. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. These words remind us that it's not the events of life that make us happy or unhappy, but the way we perceive them. We might find ourselves in difficult situations, facing obstacles or loss, and yet, we can choose how to see them. We can choose to see these challenges as opportunities for growth, as lessons rather than burdens. Imagine for a moment the difference between someone who faces adversity with a mindset of defeat, and someone who faces the same adversity with a mindset of resilience. The circumstances may be identical, but the experience, how it feels, how it shapes the person, will be entirely different. The key is not in changing what happens, but in changing how we approach it. Happiness, then, is not a distant destination, but a way of being. It's about seeing life through a lens of gratitude and acceptance, even in the face of difficulties. It's about cultivating a mindset that chooses peace over stress, joy over frustration, and acceptance over resistance. As Epictetus teaches, our true power lies in our ability to control our thoughts and our reactions. Happiness is not found in the perfect circumstances, but in the mastery of our perspective, regardless of the circumstances. So, when the world feels overwhelming, remember, the greatest shift we can make is not in our circumstances, but in the way we choose to see them. And in that shift, we find true happiness. Throughout his life, Epictetus taught that true freedom and happiness come from within, not from the outside world. His teachings are simple yet profound, reminding us that while we cannot control the events that unfold around us, we have complete control over how we respond to them. Life will present challenges, but it's in the mastery of our thoughts, our attitudes, and our reactions where our power lies. He taught us that the external world is fleeting and unpredictable, but the one thing that remains constant is our mind. Happiness, then, is not found in possessions, achievements, or the approval of others, but in the cultivation of a peaceful mind. It's about letting go of what we cannot change and focusing on what we can, our own perspective. Epictetus also showed us that suffering is not inevitable, it is our judgments about suffering that make it unbearable. By changing the way we interpret life's challenges, we can transform even the hardest experiences into opportunities for growth and inner peace. In the end, his philosophy teaches us a powerful truth: happiness is not something that happens to us, it is something we create from within. It starts with our thoughts, our beliefs, and the way we choose to see the world. And once we learn to master our inner world, the outer world can no longer dictate our peace. So, remember, happiness starts from within. It is in the mastery of our own mind, the control of our own perspective, that we find the lasting joy and contentment we seek. And that, as Epictetus would say, is the true freedom we all possess. Let us walk forward with this truth in our hearts: happiness begins from within.